Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to our Associate Agreements webinar. Our presenter tonight is Dr. Incalcaterra. Dr. Incalcaterra has served as the Program Director for the General Practice Residency Program at Lehigh Valley Hospital in Allentown, PA since 1994, and also maintains a private practice in Bethlehem. He is a member of the Pennsylvania Dental Association, the American Dental Association, 2nd District Dental Association, and the Lehigh Valley Dental Society. He has served in many leadership positions throughout his membership, most recently as the president of Pennsylvania Dental Association in 2019 to 2020. He is also a member of the International College of Dentists, Pierre Fauchard Dental Academy, and the American College of Dentists. He's also served as a delegate to the American Dental Association. He has had a lot of experience with advanced training enrollees and is very knowledgeable in guiding dental students and new dentists. We are so pleased to have him sharing his knowledge with you tonight as we jump into tonight's presentation on associate agreements.
Great, thank you. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for having me here tonight. I hope some of you were able to attend the last presentation we had on the interviewing process. And if you were there, then you kind of got a little bit of a tease about what we're going to talk about tonight. So we'll get right into this, talking about associate agreements and contracts. And there's a lot of information here tonight, so we'll certainly try to cover a lot of ground. Our next slide is a little housekeeping information. If you have any questions during the webinar, just enter them into the chat box. And what we'll do is we'll stay at the end of the presentation to kind of read through those and try to answer them as best as we can. So just use the chat box to go ahead and get questions in. Disclosures, these are kind of legal things that we have to do. I do not have any relevant financial relationships or commercial interests in this presentation. There'll be no references to investigational and or off-label use products. And the next slide is specifically for Penn. Penn Medicine is neither supporting nor endorsing this presentation. Students are urged to use evidence-based approach by utilizing scientific research and position papers and guidelines from the ADA and specialty professional associations. So those are the disclosures we have to make. So I always like to start off a lecture with talking about our objectives. So what's the point of this lecture? What are you going to get out of it tonight? So by the end of this presentation, you'll have an understanding of the importance and reason for having a written contract when you start an agreement with another practice. To have a better understanding of the different components of an associate contract, what it contains. This is very important. It's very important to understand the difference between being an employee in a practice or versus being an independent contractor. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about that. I've seen a lot of times where people who are really employees have been labeled as independent contractors, and that's really unfair to the associate. So we'll talk about that quite a bit. Talk about the different methods of compensation available to you as an employee or as an independent contractor, and understand the need for professional review of all contract and the resources available for such. I will tell you that I am not a lawyer. I have no legal background. My experience on this has been from 27 years of being a program director at Lehigh Valley Hospital. And a number of years ago, residents would get a contract and they'd ask me to review it. And over the years, I've kind of done a lot of research on this a little bit. So it's a lot of experience in this, but we're not going to really talk about a whole lot of legal things, just about some of the contents of a contract. So our next slide. So written agreements cause the parties, both the doctor who is hiring or the corporation that's hiring you, and you to address and focus on issues that you may not have otherwise thought about. Some examples are, again, the compensation method. We talked, we're going to talk a little bit about that. Resolution of payments at the termination of the agreement. Okay, how do you get paid, or do you get paid after the agreement is terminated? Any right you have to the office financial records as an associate, and any of the associates' responsibilities for managing the office. So these are some of the things that a written contract will help you with. Next slide, please. There we go. So the purposes are to both protect both the associate and the owner in the case of a dispute. And when you have any kind of contract, it's always a give and take. There's a saying that everybody should walk away from a contract a little bit happy and a little bit not happy. So it's a negotiation, and you want to make sure that everything's written out so that if there's ever a question at the end of the contract, it's all out there. So this will resolve any ambiguity and eliminate any confusion, especially with respect to compensation and duties. That's so important. And it's just a reminder of what was expected upon and what was agreed upon by both parties. So, you can always refer back to the contract if there's ever a dispute and say, well, this is what we talked about, this is what we agreed to. So it's protection for everybody. Good. Some of the essential elements of a contract, I apologize, I'm going to put my phone on silent. I just heard a little ding, and I don't want to get disturbed while we're talking tonight. So if you just give me a second to get this on silent, that'd be great. There we go. Okay, so some of the elements is the status of the associate dentist. Are they an employee or an independent contractor? The schedule that the associate will be working, and the location of services. Are you going to be working out of one office or multiple offices? Malpractice and other benefits, who pays for that? So you need to address that. The duties of the owner and the associate, for example, the on-call schedule, any management duties that might be important that the associate might be responsible for. Compensation and benefits, such as organized dentistry. If you're going to join organized dentistry, is that something that is going to be paid for by the practice, or do you have to pay for that on your own? And any business-related expenses, for example, lab fees, any special instruments that you may want for the practice, any equipment. So who's responsible for that? Next slide, please. Other things that are patient records and charts, the ownership of that obviously is the practice, but do you have access to that? Especially after you leave a practice, if there's a lawsuit, you need to have access to those records. So that should be, spelled out. Any kind of staffing for the associate. You'll see, I have some samples of contracts at the end of the presentation, and one of them specifically spells out that the associate will have an opportunity, equipment, supplies, and staff personnel to help with it. That was very nice to see. The covenant not to compete or solicit patients or staff, that's called the restrictive covenant sometimes. We're going to talk about that. What's confidential information, any trade secrets that the contract may have in there that you're not allowed to disclose. Future status of the associate, if you decide to become buy in as a partner or buy the practice completely. And attorney fees are some of the things that are inside the contracts oftentimes that you'll see that. All right, next slide. Great. So what should you be looking for in a contract? Obviously, you want to know the duration of the contract, the names of the parties involved. Is the practice going by a corporate name? And if so, that should include the owner's name in there so that you know who you're dealing with. The duration of the contract means, does it automatically renew at the end of the year? So that's called an evergreen. It automatically renews every time. Or do you have to sit down at the end of each year and negotiate a new contract? So that should be in there. The hours per day and the days of the week that the associate will work. Does the office have more than one location? And is the associate expected to perform tasks at those offices as well? Responsibility for covering office hours after emergencies after office hours. Any time off for vacation, illness, continued vacation, whether that's with or without pay. How much advance notice does that practice require for any time off? Any fringe benefits, life insurance, health insurance, malpractice insurance, 401k, bonuses, CE, dues, professional dues. And we're going to talk about this a little bit. If the contract talks about an employee manual and refers to an employee manual, you need to have access to that employee manual before you sign the contract. So it may say you'll have all the benefits enjoyed by other employees according to the employee manual. Well, you need to see that so you know what you're getting into. So you certainly want to ask for that ahead of time. And then how is a contract terminated by either party? How can the owner or the hiring doctor terminate the contract, and how can you get out of the contract as well? So those are all the things that are going to be looking for in a contract. Also a restrictive covenant. So it's important to have a restrictive covenant which is justified with regard to duration and geographic areas. And what do I mean by that? So like in an urban area, you could have a restrictive covenant that, let's say downtown Philadelphia or Pittsburgh, that you can't practice within that same building, because in an urban area there's very densely populated people, whereas in a rural area, it might be more of a 15-mile or 10-mile or 20-mile restrictive covenant because there's fewer practices in between. So, the restrictive covenant may be broader. It's always important that you should consider negotiating a phased-in restrictive covenant. So you're not excluded from practicing in an area if the contract is terminated shortly after it begins. And you'll see examples of that a little later, where there's a 90-day phase-in. So there's kind of a 90-day, trial period to see if the associate's going to work out in the practice. And let's say there was no phased-in restrictive covenant, and you're working there a month, and all of a sudden, you find out this isn't the practice, everything's horrible, you want to leave. And now you're stuck with a 2-year, 5-mile restrictive covenant, and you're really stuck and you've only worked there 60 days, or 30 days. So it's important to think about doing a phased-in restrictive covenant. If a buy-in is contemplated, a specific method of payment should be stipulated, and a trial period should be specified in the contract too. So in other words, if there's a possibility of buying in, you may want to have a 6-month or a 1-year trial period to make sure, again, this is the type of practice that you want to have, that you want to purchase into, either as a partner or eventually, buy out the practice. So that should be stipulated in the contract as well. Methods of compensation. We're going to talk about that a little bit. And space available for the associate. Again, operatories, equipment, supplies, assistance, all should be in there too. And again, if there's any kind of responsibilities that the associate would have, whether it's ordering supplies or hiring assistants or such like that, again, that all needs to be spelled out in the contract. All right, next slide. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about this very important subject here, is whether an associate is an employee or an independent contractor. And as I said, I've seen a lot of contracts where they're considered independent contractors. And I'll tell you, probably 95% of the time, or maybe 99% of the time, you're not. You're an employee, okay? And we'll go over why that's important. So the employee means that the employer or the owner dentist can control what will be done and how it's done. Okay, so the employee follows the employer's directions with respect to when and where to work, the supplies that you use, the equipment that you use, the staff, the choice of lab, etc. That's an employee. An independent contractor, on the other hand, means the employer or the owner dentist only has the right to control the result of the work. Okay, not the means and method of accomplishing that. So let's, for example, say that you go into a practice and they consider you an employee, and they say for your final impression for a denture, you're going to use Improgum for your impression material. This is what we use. This is what we have. That's what you're going to use. Okay. As an independent contractor, you can go in and say, I'm going to use the materials of my choice. If I want to use alginate for a final impression for a denture, that's up to me, okay? Because I'm an independent contractor, I get to decide how to do things. I'm going to deliver you a denture for your patient, but you don't tell me how to do things, okay? So that's kind of the difference between an independent contractor and employee. Employee basically, again, is told what to do, given the supplies and equipment to do so. Independent contractor, on the other hand, can make their own independent judgment and have their own, really, they can actually even set their hours. And we're going to go into that a little bit more in the next slide. So if the answers to any of these questions are yes, that means the associate is an employee, okay? So does the owner provide instructions? So about when and where and how the work is to be performed. Okay, and again, these are going to be pretty obvious because almost all of these are going to be yes. Okay, so must the services be personally rendered by the associate? What do I mean by that? Well, as an independent contractor, you could say, it's like going to a plumber, an independent contractor. I hire a plumber, right? Well, I don't necessarily hire that plumber. He sends whoever he wants to my house to fix my sink. Okay, so that's an independent contractor. Okay, I'm hiring this guy for service, but he's got people that are coming in and out. And again, they may be independent contractors. They're bringing their own tools. They come when they want. They do the job the way they want to, etc. So again, that's not going to happen usually in dentistry. So must they be personally rendered by the associate? Yes. Is there a continuing relationship? Obviously, yes, you have a contract. Okay. Does the owner provide any training to the associate? Okay. Does, again, mentoring, for example, or just, any kind of training about how things are done in that particular office, or how they, do their what burrs they use, what impression material they use, etc. And are they integrated into the business? Obviously, yes. Does the owner set the schedule? Okay, the work hours, or does the owner hire, supervise, and pay the assistants? And does the associate devote substantially full time to the business of the owner? Again, all those are probably going to be yeses, and you're almost always going to be considered an employee. The next slide talks about, this is what, again, continuing that if this is yes, that you are an associate, an employee rather, is the work performed on the premises. So again, a little bit different with the plumbing, but if let's say I needed something special for my house, the plumber could assemble that outside, bring it in. Okay, his independent contractor can do that for us. So again, you're going to work on the owner's premises. You're required to perform the services in an order or sequence set by the owner. Do you have to submit written or oral reports? Well, yes, you're doing charting. Okay, so that's obviously that's a yes. Are you paid by the hour, the week, or the month? Does the owner have the right to discharge the associate at will? Okay. And does the owner pay business or travel expenses for the associate? So any one of those means that yes, that you are an employee of the practice. All right, the next slide. So again, we're going to switch this now and go, do any of these that say yes means you're an independent contractor? Okay. Does the associate supply significant tools, material, equipment, and staffing? Okay. Are you bringing your own tools in? Are you bringing in your own supplies? Are you bringing in your own dental assistant? Okay, that you're paying for. Are you taking your supplies home and sterilizing? All right. Well, if you're doing that, yes, you could be considered an independent contractor. Are you working for more than one firm, one dental office at a time? Could you be working at multiple dental offices as an independent contractor? Yes, you can. And can you terminate your relationship with the owner at any time you wish? Okay. Well, if you have a contract that says you need a 90-day or 60-day or whatever to terminate, then you're an employee. If you can say come and go as will, then you're an independent contractor. And can the associate realize a profit or a loss as a result of their services? Again, thinking about this, if you come in to do services and you've got to bring your own supplies and equipment and staffing, et cetera, there's a chance that you could end up with a loss. Okay, you may not make money that day. So that would be yes for an independent contractor. Again, you're probably not going to see that ever in a dental associate agreement. Does an associate have a significant investment in facilities and their own equipment? Again, making your services, offering your service to the general public, not just through this practice that you're in. And do you pay your own Social Security? This is really important now. Are you paying your own Social Security taxes and making appropriate payments to the IRS, either on a monthly or quarterly basis? So if you're an employee, the employer takes part of the Social Security taxes out and you contribute that. So you'll see about 7.5% of your pay taken out for Social Security and Medicare payments. Okay, that's paid to the government. The employer matches that. So about 15% of taxes, half are paid by the employee, half are paid by the employer. Okay. If you're an independent contractor, you have to pay that 15% completely yourself. All right. So you're making less money, honestly, about 7.5% less as an independent contractor because you've got to pay taxes. And then you either got to do that yourself or hire an accountant to manage that for you. So that's a big difference between an employee and an independent contractor. All right, next slide. Thank you. So the other thing that employees are protected by federal and state regulations regarding anti-discrimination, overtime pay, unemployment compensation. And again, they're responsible for filing their own personal end of year tax returns. Okay, not their business. As an independent contractor, you would not be protected under certain federal and state laws with respect to discrimination, overtime, unemployment compensation, and you must file monthly or quarterly business taxes with the IRS. So again, those are some of the big differences right there. So I hope that that kind of summarizes. And again, the more you think about this, I think you'll see that almost always you'll be considered an employee. And you may see, though, you'll be asked to agree to be an independent contractor. And I think you have to talk to the person that is hiring you to make sure that they understand that on an IRS basis, the IRS actually has something like 26 questions, and these are some of them that you saw, that determines if you're an independent contractor or an employee. And I think you need to have a hard talk with the practice if they want you to be an independent contractor, because it's really not the correct way to go. So what type of relationships can we have with an employee and a practice? So you could be, an employee employer, just like we talked about, independent contractor. Again, we just spent a lot of time talking about that. You could have the opportunity to buy into a practice. You buy ownership into the practice, again, become part owner, a partner into a practice. Or you may have the ability to specifically buy out the entire practice, okay, take over the whole practice. So with the buy-in, the owner is bringing in an associate with the specific intent of the associate buying ownership or percentage in the practice. Usually that comes in with a trial period. We talked about that a little bit earlier, about 6 months or a year. You may want to have a trial period, or even a little longer, and then draw up the legal purchasing documents. So those documents are not in the initial contract. It's just laid out that, after 6 months or a year or 18 months, the employee has the opportunity to buy into the practice. And the same thing, similar arrangements with the buy-in, with the exception that the associate in a buyout wants to purchase the entire practice after a specific time. So those are some of the relationships you can have. Next. If you're going to buy in or buy out a practice, it's really essential to have an appraisal of the practice, okay? And that really should be done at the beginning. You're going to see that in one of the contracts that we have, that they specifically said that the appraisal of the practice is done before the employee starts. And why is that important? Well, it's important, as you can see on the bottom, if you work there for a year or so, and you bring up the value of the practice significantly, and they say, okay, the practice went from 1 million to now 1.5 million since you started working here, you need to buy the $1.5 million to buy this practice. Well, you've contributed 50% of that, or 25% or a third of that value to the practice by working there. So that means you're paying for your own value that you've used to increase this practice's value. So if the price is specified beforehand, that's the most fair thing for you. So if you start working there in 2023, and in 2025 you want to buy that practice, they should go back to the value at 2023. Look at the practice numbers, tax returns, etc., based on 2023. So you're not paying an inflated price for that practice because of your added value. All right. Thank you. We're going to talk a little bit about compensation. We're going to spend a lot more time actually on compensation. So there's many different methods of compensation, and this is really important. The simplest, and I think in the beginning of a contract, is a straight salary. If you're coming out of school or out of a residency, you have a lot of debt. You need to have some financial security. So it's important that maybe a straight salary where it's a set dollars per day. I have a resident that showed me her contract about a week or so ago. It was $800 for an 8-hour day, and she's getting 4 days, so she'll be getting a minimum of $3,200 a week. And then on top of that, she gets 20% on any part-time days that she works. So I think she's going to be working 4 hours on Friday, and what they'll do is give her 20% of her production. So that's pretty nice, because she's getting, again, a set salary. That's very comfortable for her. It makes it predictable for how much money she's going to be bringing in. And on other compensation methods, that's not set that way. It's not as steady. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But this should really only last about 6 to 12 months, because from the employee, from the associate side of it, you could be as busy or as lazy as you want to be, because you're going to get the same amount of money. So there's no incentive to be really producing a high level of production. It's just the nature of it. But you could go then to a salary with commission. So you're getting the financial security of having a salary, but at a quarterly or annually or semi-annually basis, there's an incentive package that's provided. So in other words, if you hit certain goals, you'll get a bonus on top of your salary. And that's a nice thing because again, it gives you a little more incentive to be a little bit busier and to be more aggressive in your, your treatment planning and production. All right, so next slide, please. So other method of compensation is payment by commission. Okay, and there's two ways we're going to go talk about that. But one of the things I always caution is that, a lot of times practice nowadays, I think practices are paying close to 72% in overhead. It used to be 60, 65. But ever since the pandemic, with salaries going up and supplies going up, and all the other things that are happening in the pressure of a practice, insurance companies not raising their fees and their reimbursements. So I think that's gone down to closer to 70%. So when you're paying by commission, I always recommend that the owner should not be paying any more than what the practice's net percentage is. So if you have a 70% overhead, that means that the practice owner probably doesn't want to pay any more than 30% because that's pretty much break even, for them. If they're paying more than 30% and they have overhead of 70, they're losing money. So that doesn't really work. So there's two types of methods is collections. I'll start with the slide on the right, the box on the right. That's based on money that's collected by the practice for the associate's work. That's difficult. And I'll tell you why that's difficult, because you need to be on top of the collections in the practice. Okay. Now, if the practice has really, really good collection policies, the patient either pays at the time of service or that they pay their portion if there's insurance at the time of service, okay, that money's going to roll in a little quicker for you versus if they say, okay, Mrs. Jones, we did your crown today. We're going to send it out to the insurance companies and we'll see what they're going to pay. And then we'll send you a bill for the balance. Okay, well, the insurance company's not in any rush to pay that bill. They could take a month or so before they pay that money. And they may only pay half of that. Now you've got to go after Mrs. Jones. And it's already a month and a half later that you send out a bill to her. And now she's forgotten. And da, da, da. So, so by the time you get all this money, it's many, many months down the line. Whereas in a practice that's collecting their co-pays and their deductibles up front, that money's coming into you immediately. And then when the insurance pays it, that's where the balance of that money comes in. So as an associate, it's hard to keep on track of that. You're going to have to ask for kind of daily reports of the money that was brought into the practice based on the procedures that you did. And it's somewhat complicated. You have to have a really good trusting relationship with the practice, with the front desk staff, and make sure that you're getting paid properly. The easier way, although a lot of practices don't want to do this, is based on production. Okay, so in other words, you produce $1,000 today, and I'm going to give you, 30% of 1,000, so you're getting $300 at the end of the day. Bad example, but that's just a simple way of explaining it. So it's not based on how much that the practice collects, it's what the practice produces, what you produce for the practice. And typically that's going to be lower than the collections. Okay, it's just going to be because there's a little bit of risk involved for the practice that they may not get all the money that they thought they were going to get. Okay, they bill Mrs. Jones, or they say, Mrs. Jones, you need to pay us the $600 for your crown, and we'll get the $600 from the insurance company, and they pay you that based on the $1,200 that you collected. Well, something happens with Mrs. Jones' insurance. She forgot to renew it, and now there is no insurance company paying it. So now you got to go after Mrs. Jones for the other $600 that she didn't pay. So it's a little bit riskier for the practice. But from an employee standpoint, it's a lot easier for you to manage how much money you're going to make, because you can just at the end of the day okay, I did, this, that, and I produced, $3,000 today, and I'm going to get 30% of 3,000 or 20%, whatever it is. And that's much easier for you. There is one thing I want to caution you on that. There's a thing called net production in a practice. Okay, and I actually found out about this through an ADA meeting because, I'm actually thinking about selling my practice, and, I know how much the practice produces, and I know how much we collect. And the difference that I actually pretty much have like a 99% collection rate in my practice. It's really good. Very few accounts receivable. But the thing is, I don't collect 100% of the money that I produce because I have a couple of insurance companies that I agree to a set fee schedule. Okay. So that's called net production. So if my crowns normally are $1,200, and I have an agreement with Delta, and Delta pays only $800 for a crown. And I agree to that. Okay, so Mrs. Jones, she has to pay 400 and Delta pays 400. I'm getting $800. My net production is 100%. It's $800 there. Okay, I collected 100%, but really, if you look at my overall, what my fee should have been, it's only 800 of that 1200. I'm only getting what, 2/3 of my whatever, 3/4 of my actual fee. But net production is based on what the practice agrees to accept as payment for a procedure. So if you're going to be paid on production, you're going to have to look at what the contracts say in the different practices that you're working at, as far as what they've agreed to accept as full payment for a procedure. So there's a little bit of a difference between real production, which is what the fees would be if there was no insurance. Okay, if everybody was paying $1,200 for a crown, that's easy. That would be great. That would be life. But net production is based on what the practice has agreed to. And that's why I said at our last lecture about looking at the practices and asking what kind of insurance programs they participate in and taking a look at those fee schedules, because that could impact your payment. There's a little salary formula down there. You know, I've actually played with this a few times and I really can't figure it out. Every time I work with this, it doesn't come out right. But I had this little formula where production is your desired income, how much you want to make, divided by the compensation rate. So if you're getting 33%, plus times the practice's collection rate. So if a practice has a collection rate of 96% and they're paying you 33% of your collections, and you want to make 100,000, so what you do is do 100,000 divided by 30.33, you know, the 33% collection rate, compensation rate, times 0.96, which is 96% of the practice's collection rate. And that would come out to about $322,000. So what that means is you have to produce $322,000 for the practice to make 100,000. And if you do 50 hours a week, 36 hours a week, that $322,000 comes out to $179 an hour that you would have to produce to make 100,000. So it's just a simple formula that you can play with a little bit to see, you know, if I want to make $200,000 and I'm getting paid 30% compensation and the practice's, you know, collection rate is 98%, you know, what do I have to make for the practice to get that $200,000? So you may want to just, you know, jot that down or take a slide picture of that or whatever. All right, that's it. Next one. So there's also a compensation method called the net profits method. And I don't really care for this one too much. Excuse me a second. And because of the example that's down below, and it's the amount collected minus the lab expenses, okay, in this particular case. So a $5,000 case, they take away the $500 in lab fees, the profit's $4,500, and now you're getting a percentage of that $4,500. What I don't like about this is they're taking away $500 in lab fees. In other words, they're making you pay the lab fee, essentially, by doing it this way. So the 100% of the lab fees is being taken off of your production. So that's something that's really not so great. So I would try to negotiate with a practice that if you're going to pay lab fees, it should be based on the percent that you're getting paid. So if you're getting paid 33% of collections, you pay 33% of the lab fees, and the practice pays the other 2/3. The other issue that we want to talk about a little bit is an advance, which is basically a loan against future earnings. Okay, the practice is going to say to you, you know, we're going to give you $5,000 a month. But what happened is you really only generated about $4,000 for the practice. So they're going to pay you the $5,000, but you owe on paper $1,000 to the practice. The second month, the practice collects $6,000. You're paid your $5,000 to make up the $1,000 that you owed. Okay. The third month, the collection is $7,000. They're still only pay you the $5,000, and what they're going to do is bank that $2,000 for you in the future. So that's usually something that you can work out, but that should be, again, a limited time. You don't want to have that for a long term. Again, that could be a sort of like the hourly rate, or I mean the daily rate that we talked about. An advance is a similar way of compensating you with a steady income that you know is going to be guaranteed for a while. But again, at the end, you have to settle up and make sure that the practice is getting back the money that they are owed, or you're getting all the money that you're owed. All right, next slide. So again, a little warning about the collections method. If you're getting paid on a percentage collections, an indemnity practice, that's one that does not accept insurance contracts. Okay, they're getting their full fee, and you're going to get paid more for the work that you do on production or as on payments are collected because they're getting their full fee. Again, they're getting that $1,200 a crown. But if they participate in many different types of insurance plans, PPOs, they're going to have a lower collection of fees because again, they're accepting lower fees based on what that contract says from the insurance companies compared to their usual customary and reasonable fee. So you're going to get paid less. So again, it's very important to have a honest conversation with the practice beforehand to look at the different contracts that they have assigned, agreed to with insurance companies, and know what you're getting into beforehand. All right, next slide. Again, another warning about that is it's dependent, the collection method is dependent on the ability of you to convince a patient of the need of dental care or the practice to do so and to deliver it, but also on the competence of the practice to collect those fees. Okay, so again, you would be within your right of, as a potential practitioner, to ask about the success rate of the collection by the front desk and what financial policies are in place. Again, my office, we know ahead of time, we can pull up their insurance on the computer. We can see that they have a $50 deductible and they owe 20% for the procedure that we do today. So at the end of the procedure before they leave, Mrs. Smith, your bill today is $180. How would you like to pay for that? Okay, it's not like, well, we'd like to send you a bill. It's like, how would you like to pay for that today? We accept cash, credit card, checks. We can give you a discount if you pay, a cash or check, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the types of things you need to look at in a practice when you're evaluating, how you're going to get compensated for your work. All right, next. So weigh the benefits. Again, if you're told that you're going to be an independent contractor, again, you're going to have to pay 7.5% more than if you're an employee. And you may then want to ask for a higher rate. If they say that you're an independent contractor and we're not changing it, and that's fine, you could say, well, instead of paying me 33% of collections, I want 40.5% because I have to pay my own Social Security taxes. All right. So you could kind of negotiate that. And, weigh the benefits of how much you're getting compensated versus the benefits that may be provided by the practice. So if you have a family and you need healthcare insurance and the practice is going to provide that for you, you may accept a lower reimbursement rate. Okay, instead of 30%, they might go down to 25%. But if you're getting all these great benefits, they're paying for CE, they're paying for your dues, they have a retirement plan, there's uniforms, all these other things that are great, then, and if that's a worry for you, then great, maybe you'd be able to negotiate or willing to accept a slightly lower compensation rate because you're getting such great benefits that are important for you and your family. If you're married and your spouse has those benefits already, that's not so important to you, and you can opt out of that healthcare plan that they may have and just say, I'd like a little bit more compensation because I don't need the healthcare insurance that you're providing. So again, you want to look at that, look at those benefits that are available to you. All right, next. Real important that you have an attorney review every contract that you get. Okay. And obviously, if you get a contract from a doctor, don't use their same attorney to review it. It's worth spending, $1,000, $2,000, whatever it costs for an attorney to review. I know it's a lot of money, but so is dental school. And, if you spend a little bit of extra money on top of that to protect yourself, that's really, really important because there's, again, some legal things that I'm not talking about that could be in a contract tonight that, you may not see, and you really want to have another set of eyes on top of that. So you may not want to ask the attorney to look at all the negotiated things. Okay, if you agree to a restrictive covenant and you've agreed to the compensation package, et cetera, you just want the attorney to look at any little details that you might have missed on a legal aspect. Okay, the fine print that's back in there. So always have an attorney to do the review for you. If you're uncomfortable with any part of the contract, see if they can negotiate. And, a lot of times I've had residents that come to me with a contract that really looks boilerplate. I know that this doctor didn't spend a lot of time thinking about it. It was something that he got from a friend or she got from a friend and just gave it to them, and they really didn't know it was in it. And they're very willing sometimes to negotiate, again, whether it's the restrictive covenant, the phase in of the restrictive covenant, the different salary methods that we talked about. So it's really important that you just, if you're not comfortable with anything, just ask. It's easy to ask. Okay. As I told you, that one resident of mine is getting $800 a day, and then 20% on the days she's not working full days. And I said, 20% of production's okay. It's a little low. Why don't you just ask if they can do 25? Just tell them, I think, you could say my program director said 30% is the normal production rate. But how about, could you bump it up to 25? And if the person says no, they say no. Okay, big deal. But if they say yes, it's golden. Okay, you win. So, and that's what you want to do. If you're contemplating buying into the practice as a partner or buying out, it's important to get an appraisal of the practice. Do that on your own. That costs about $3,000. I just had that done for my own practice, an appraisal. And but again, get a separate appraisal on your own side. Don't just go by their appraisal. Get a separate appraisal, and that'll just be protection for you in the future. And again, don't forget that we talked about making sure that that practice price is set before you get there, before you're, increasing the production of the practice. So the next couple of slides, I have some samples of the contracts there, and I'm not sure how well you can see these, but this is just some of the stuff that I have. Now, this is contract number one. All these examples, number one, come out of the same contract. And what this is saying is that in addition to your clinical experience, you're going to be looked upon, or we're going to specifically kind of look at your overall success based on your acceptance of the practice's what does it say? Burdens and responsibilities. I never heard of practice burdens and responsibilities. So my note to the resident in red there was, you should ask them what those burdens and responsibilities are. It's kind of a weird thing. I never saw that before, but I didn't know there were burdens in a practice as an associate. So I specifically said, if they say something like that, ask what it is. Again, this is the same contract. As an employee, you'll be involved at least initially on a part-time basis in this practice of dentistry. You'll be expected to have evening and Saturday hours and participate equally in the on-call schedule. So my notes are quite extensive there in red, but I said they should kind of spell out what those Saturday hours are, what those evenings are. Is it every Saturday? Is it a half day? Is it a full day? That should all be spelled out for you. And participate equally. Well, if you're working there 2 days a week and there's other dentists working 5 days a week in that practice, is that fair for you to be equally taking call after hours and on weekends? So equal should be equal in not only, the number of hours you're working, days you're working, but in the on-call as well. And do you want to ask, do I have to physically come into the practice after hours? If I get called at 2 in the morning, are you expecting me to come in, or is there somebody answering the phone for the practice that's saying, okay, well, they'll call you back first thing in the morning? And the other thing about on-call is I rarely go into my practice now, and of course I own my practice and have a great staff, but I'll call up my dental assistant on a Saturday and say, hey, somebody so and so broke a tooth. Are you available to come in and help me? Because first of all, I don't even know where half the supplies are in my practice anymore. They move things around for job security. But secondly, as a protection, I don't want to go in with a female patient alone. As a female, you shouldn't never want to go into a practice, with a male patient alone. Just as the whole protection thing. It's nice to have a second set of hands there in case there's, anything that you need to do. All right, next slide. This one on the top, it's that the lab fee is the compensation is 35% of collections, but they're asking that you pay 50% for the lab fees. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it should be equal. So if you're getting paid 35%, you should be paying 35% of the lab fees, not 50%. And at the bottom, I really love this one. This was the very last paragraph before the red. It says, you will be an employee of the practice and your wages will be taxed accordingly. As the practice grows into full-time, we will entertain future benefits such as vacation time, 401k, et cetera, et cetera. At this time, we do not offer these benefits, but we certainly will hope to add them in the future. Well, that's a bunch of bull. I mean, why would you even put that in there? We don't have these things, but we might put them in. There's no reason to put that in a contract. There's no guarantee there. It's like wishful thinking. So it was just fluff that was in a practice that I kind of found a little bit amusing. I would, certainly strike that out. It's such a dumb thing to have in there. So, all right, next page, please. All right. Um, a lot of stuff in the top here that you'll be introduced to the practice's patients and referral sources. You'll I'm sorry, I just have to expand this a little bit. Express condition of the agreement that you will not, during the term of your employee or during the 24-hour month following the employee, any reason voluntary, involuntary, work within 7 miles of the practice. So that again, that's the restrictive covenant that we were talking about earlier. I would again ask that that be waived during your trial period. If you're there for a couple of months and things don't work out, now you're stuck with 2 years, 7 miles. So I think that should not be enforced during any kind of trial period for you. The bottom one is that you wouldn't directly or indirectly solicit any patients of the practice in that time period. And that's fine. You'll often see that not only can't you work within a certain radius and for a certain number of years or months, but you also can't actively solicit patients. So you can't send, postcards or emails, or you can't, contact your patients announcing that you've joined another practice. What I do recommend, though, is that there be a clause in there that says another practice hires you, again, outside of that 7-mile radius and outside of the, within that 2-year time period, that Dr. Kapoor has joined my practice. Please welcome Dr. Kapoor to our practice. Okay. Well, that doesn't say Dr. Kapoor used to work for Dr. Incalcaterra. Please welcome Dr. Kapoor to our practice, because what's that saying now is like, oh, patients of Dr. Incalcaterra, guess what? Your doctor moved. Make sure that any on-call is spelled out in the contract. That's all very important. If they don't do that, again, you're going to have a lot of problems trying to really figure out where, what your hours really are and your responsibilities. So, Amanda, if you're back on, I'm on slide 32. I'm down about 2 more slides from there. Yeah, we're going to skip that slide. There we go. That's where we are. So again, our item number 5 is talking about patients' hour and scheduling. So you want your work hours and on-call schedule spelled out, either in the contract or in an appendix to the agreement, so that you're very clear about what's going on. All right, next slide. Great. So this one here is talking about, if the employee leaves. And in item A, in item number 8A, it says that if there are no payments, including commission payments, shall be paid after the date that the associate leaves employment. Okay, and I thought that not paying somebody for their work was, I think, illegal. I think a better solution to that would be in the contract that you have 30 to 60 days post-employment for any payments that come in. So again, if you're getting paid on collections, what this particular contract was saying is the day you leave, that's it. Whatever comes in after that, you don't get paid. And I don't think that's very fair to anybody. So if you see that in a contract, negotiate that you should have at least 60 days, maybe even 90 days, especially with collections, that you have ability to get paid for the work that you did. This one again is on 8B. The practice is paying lab fees, which is good. Oh, I'm sorry. I think I may have messed up on it. Let's see. Oh, okay. So what this was saying is that the associate was getting their fees. The lab fees will be fully covered by the associate if you do orthodontics, but the host or the owner of the practice is going to pay all the lab fees for everything else. So my note to this resident was that I thought 30% was a little bit low, but since they're all in pay, they're paying all the lab fees. That's not so bad. Again, you want to look at the fees of the practice. Are they do they have a good fee schedule that may participate? I mean, make your compensation higher. But if they're participating with a lot of other things, including Medicaid, you're not going to get paid that much. So be very careful again about looking at the different aspects of the contract and the type of insurance programs that they're participating with. All right, next slide. All right. So this one again, this item number 9 on the top, this was really a very good one. It says the host agrees to provide suitable treatment facilities that are appropriate for the performance of the duties. You have the right to use the equipment, furniture, fixtures, instrument supplies, records, personnel on the premises. Okay, and the key thing was personnel, that they're going to provide you with a dental assistant. You would think that should be there, but it's nice to have that spelled out so that there's no question that you would have the appropriate staff for your practice. Associate expenses, associate shall pay for associates' own life and disability insurance, professional fees, and dues. The host shall not be responsible to provide life, disability. All right, so I asked, what about other benefits? These are kind of like a no, they're negotiable, but this practice is saying, no, we're not going to pay for that stuff. But what about medical insurance? What about malpractice or liability insurance? Is there a pension plan? Is there incentive bonuses or other things? So this kind of did not spell out everything. It spelled out what they're not paying for, but they didn't spell out what they are paying for. So I recommend you ask to have that stuff looked at as well. All right, next slide. This one's a little bit wordy here, but I'll just point out that this talks about the associates. Part A is on the restrictive covenant. Again, I'll always recommend that a phased-in restrictive covenant is good. The premises on item B shall include any office location the associate has practiced dentistry under the term of the agreement. So if they have multiple offices, if you're working for a practice that says 2 or 3 offices in an area, every time you move to one of those different offices, now you're expanded your restrictive covenant. So if one practice is 10 miles from another, and you've got a 5-mile practice restrictive covenant, so you've got 5 miles from this practice and 5 miles for that one. So now you've got basically, a larger radius of the restrictive covenant. So if you're working in multiple practices, again, have that spelled out where they are, and does the restrictive covenant apply to all 3 of those practices if there's 3 practices. The item C was talking about compensation, that you're really not going to be able to work for somebody else that's competing with the practice. However, it did allow you to work in things like an FQHC, or like if you work in a residency program that pays their staff. This was not precluding that, so that was a little bit of a good thing. And then there was this last thing on item D. It's a little wordy, but what I'll just summarize for you, it talks about 2 years for a restrictive covenant, but 4 years for a non-solicitation agreement. Okay, you're not going to be able to solicit patients for 4 years. And again, that doesn't jive. If it's 2 years, it's 2 years. If it's a 2-year restrictive covenant, that's all the non-solicitation agreement should be. And again, on item E, we cut that out from this because it was a little bit too much, but it's talking about soliciting staff. And you'll also see that you're not allowed to solicit staff when you leave a practice. And that is legal. I talked to attorneys about that, and that's standard, that you can't ask a staff person to come along with you. Again, this should be only a 2-year restriction on that instead of the 4 years that was added to this contract. So I didn't like that in this particular contract. All right, next. There's just, again, talking about 50% of the lab fees. Again, I thought that was a little bit high. But if you look at item B, and it talks about an advance, and it talks about, but it says, and this was the contract that the resident got, it actually had a blank for blank weeks, okay, or up to blank for each week. Well, that's got to be spelled out. You can't leave blanks in a contract. So if you see any blanks, before you sign the dotted line, make sure you have all those blanks filled in. All right, next, please. This was a pretty big red flag, and I really, with this particular contract, I recommended that the resident not sign this, and unfortunately it didn't work out. The associate acknowledges that the owner has not guaranteed and does not guarantee to provide specific number of hours per day of week of work. Associate acknowledge that no specific amount of time has been guaranteed or promised to the associate. Owner agrees that to use reasonable effort to provide business to associate based on the owner's overflow. So that was really, really a big red flag. Basically, it's saying I'm hiring you, but I can't guarantee that I'm going to give you any work or pay you. And it says in here, my note to the resident, you could be sitting around twiddling your thumbs and generating no income for you or your family, but you can't work elsewhere. So if you're being hired again, and you see something like that, red flag, don't sign it. Ask for a guaranteed salary or some sort of bonus, some sort of program where you're paid in advance and then you're paying back afterwards. So that's just really, really bad. All right, our next slide. Again, I didn't really care for item B here. It says the owner shall direct and control the assignment of patients to the associate. That determination made solely at the discretion of the owner and no consideration in consideration of the best interest of the patient. So, if somebody specifically comes to a practice and says, I want to see Dr. Incalcaterra, I'm going to, obviously that patient's been referred to me directly and they want to see me. New patient calls, hey, I'm new. I'd like to, make an appointment with your practice. Great. Then that should go to the associate. So there should be something where if there's every other patient that calls, maybe is divided between the associate and the owner. Okay, if there's just one person. If there's 3 or 4 different docs, again, there should be a rotating basis where the patients are assigned to the practitioners based on a rotating basis, so that everybody gets an equal share of the new patients coming in. All right, next slide, please. This again was that contract where this was in the Lehigh Valley, and this was a 2-year contract, but it was 20 miles. And the Lehigh Valley, if you know this area, is not a rural area. We're pretty much a suburban area. There's 3 major cities: Allentown, Bethlehem, and Easton. Now, in the outskirts, if you go a little bit north of here, there's certainly rural areas. But to say 20 miles from Allentown, when I did the math on that, I did the circle, and it took this into New Jersey, into the western part of Lehigh County, up toward the Poconos and down past Quakertown. So this was really overly restrictive. And honestly, if it was ever challenged in court, it would never stand up. Just a word about restrictive covenants, by the way. There's a move afoot, and I've seen this in the past few years, that the legislatures are trying to get rid of restrictive covenants because basically it hinders people from providing care, especially in the rural areas. If you wanted to open up a practice, you work a couple of years in a practice in a rural area, and there's not a lot of practices around there, and we're really the patients are having difficulty finding practitioners. Those restrictive covenants are really denying them care and denying the young practitioner to make their own living. So those are starting to be looked at, and legislatures are starting to think about getting rid of them because, again, it's an access to care issue. Next slide, please. So this was a good thing because it says in the event that this agreement is terminated within the 90-day trial period, so there was a trial period laid out on this of 90 days, then that everything in the restrictive covenant is null and void. And I thought that was really good. Okay, that's again something you do want to see. You want to see a trial period, and you want to see that a restrictive covenant is either phased in after that trial period or phased in a little at a time. And if that things don't work out, that's done with. So that was a really, really good thing in this particular contract. That had some bad things in it as well. All right, next. Again, this is what I talked about earlier, and you'll see on that 3rd paragraph down. In the event associate agrees to become a partner, associate agrees to pay owner the same percentage of the value of the practice at the time of the commencement of this agreement as the percentage of the partnership. Okay, that's what I talked about earlier. You don't want to add value to a practice and then have to pay for that value of what you brought to it. So, you're paying for something you built. So it's very good to have that looked at in the beginning. That was a really good line there. So next slide, please. All right. So again, this is kind of a little bit wordy here, but what this does, this contract guarantees that the associate, the employee, is going to get a biweekly salary of $3,500. And then on top of that, there was different percentages based on how much production per quarter. So you can see that if they got up to $70,000, they would get 30% of that. If they went between 70 and 104,000, they would get 35% of that additional amount. And if they went over $104,000, they would get 40% of that additional on top of that. So you get 30% up to 70,000, 35 between the 70 and 104, and 40 over the 104,000. So that was really nice. You know, that was a really nice bonus incentive, and I thought that was very creative also. All right, next slide. This one here was, I thought that this was very fair, because you'll see that this is talking, the second line where it says both during the period of employment and after termination, the employee will be granted limited access to the business records of the employer, the owner, for a period of 365 days, a full year following the termination, in order to verify that his compensation has been accurately paid. That's probably the most generous, reasonable thing I've ever seen in a contract as far as getting paid afterwards. Okay, I talked to you earlier about how some people, once you terminate, that's it. There's no more money coming in. This was really, really generous that they allowed them up to a year to go back and look at the records and make sure everything that they collected was paid to the associate. So that was really nice. Next slide, please. This is talking about medical being included. It talks about after a vesting period that's required under the term of the employer's health and welfare plan, the employer will provide at the employer's cost, except that the employee shall contribute 20% to the premium for biweekly draw. So what this is saying, that after a waiting period, you can get medical, and the practice will pay 80% of that premium, and the employee would pay 20% of the premium. The problem is you don't know what the vesting period is. So find out what that vesting period or what that waiting period is. You know, that could be over a year in some cases. So if you need health insurance right away, you know, you have a family, you have a young family, you need health insurance. You need to know that, whether that's included right away or if it's a delay before you get that. And the same thing on the next slide, talks about an IRA or a pension plan for benefits. Again, there's usually a vesting period or a waiting period. I may have mentioned this earlier, but sometimes the contracts will say these benefits are the same as what's in the employee manual. So get the employee manual and really thoroughly understand it, because these things may be important to you, and you may want to, you know, make sure that your expectations are up to, you know, what's in the contract as well. Next one, this is a real quick one. This was a 10-mile restrictive covenant. And again, in a rural practice, that may be reasonable. In a urban, suburban area, that's a little bit extensive. So again, something you can negotiate. And again, after termination, the employee will not engage directly or indirectly, you know, with the practice. Again, it was around 5 miles in a suburban area is more reasonable than the 10 miles that was in this. So that's pretty much it for my slides. We have another slide that talks about some of the resources that I used to put this together. The ADA Council on Dental Practice, Alpha Omega. I don't think that's still available. You may see if that's available on their website. The IRS ruling, and then again, disclosure here. I have no relationship to Phil Cooper. Never used him, but he has a practice associate guide, and you can ask for that. He sends it out to the residency programs every year, and we hand them out to the residents. It's a paper book. Again, no relationship to him. No, I'm not promoting him, but he does have a nice booklet that, and I'm sure other practice brokers have those as well. So he's a broker, but you know, it's just one of the ones that I use for this presentation. So that's it for my presentation. I'm going to turn this back over to Amanda, I believe, and she'll go from here. And I'll get into to see if there's anything on the chat.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Incalcaterra. That was a very knowledgeable presentation, and I hope that everybody learned a lot tonight. So one thing I wanted to mention is Pennsylvania Dental Association has a Connections mentoring program. So if you would like to get matched with a mentor based on your practice type, practice location, or specialty, we can certainly match you with an experienced dentist. So you'll go to padental.org/connections. You can sign up there and we can get you matched with a mentor. And then the ADA also has ADAPT, which is ADA Practice Transitions. This can help you find a job. It matches based on philosophy of care, templates and tools to put your best foot forward, and there are opportunities nationwide as well. And then there will be a post-webinar survey I will be sending out in an email the next day or two. If you take the survey, you will receive an Amazon gift card. So please do so when you do receive that email. And if you have any questions, membership@padental.org. You can email us there and we can help you out with anything there. And then we can go to the chat box if there are any questions.
Yeah, there was one that I saw came from Jack directly to me, so I'll read it out to everybody. And Jack, thanks for your question. I can't answer for orthodontics. I apologize for that. I ran a general practice residency program, and I never had anybody go into an ortho practice. So his question was, what is the competitive rate for percentage of production or percentage of collections for an associate, particularly for orthodontic associates? So again, I apologize. Can't help you on that one. I could try to see. Jack, I'm gonna give you my I'll give everybody my email address. I normally don't do this, but I'd be happy to answer any questions I can in case something comes up after. So it's lowercase CJI DMD. So it's my initials, DMD, at ptd.net, Penn Teledata, ptd.net. So CJIDMD at ptd.net. So if you have questions, Jack, I'll try to, if you send me an email, just remind me, I'll try to talk to some of my orthodontic friends. But as far as a general practice, again, I used to say it was 30% for production, 35% for collections. I think with the current environment that practices are having a higher overhead, that may not be the case right now. But you can kind of use that as a starting point. 30% of collections and 35% of 35% of collections, 30% of production. You may want to come down 5% on that. Your expectations based on the current environment with the cost of everything and the overhead being up so high.
Dr. Can you repeat your email again so I can place it in the chat?
Yeah, it's lowercase CJI, Charles J. Incalcaterra, DMD at ptd.net, PeterThomasDavid.net.
Okay, thank you. And then I did have a question directly sent to me about the recording of this webinar. I will be sending it out in the post-event email as well once we get it uploaded to our YouTube. So you guys will have access to it as well. You can send it to your friends, anyone who wasn't able to attend tonight as well.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. There was a little bit where I lost you, and I don't know if everybody got disconnected or what happened there. So I have a little problem sometimes in my house. I like to go in my basement, but the Wi-Fi is not great there. I put an extender down there. That didn't help. So I came up here to my top floor, and usually don't lose contact, but something happened a little bit there. So hopefully the recording wasn't too messed up. So
yeah, that was my connection that did have an issue there. But so there might be a little blip in the recording there, but
yeah,
there was
just there were just 1 or 2 slides that I kind of just talked through it, and it wasn't a big deal. So thanks for that.
Yes, and then if there are any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. But I do appreciate everyone coming out tonight, and I hope you all really enjoyed the webinar. Someone did say, what do you think about the draw and reconciliation contract I received that had a 55-hour draw and reconciliation?
I think the $55, quite honestly, is low. Hygienists are making that much money now on an hourly rate. I would think like closer to 100 is probably more reasonable. That's again based on my residents, so they've had an extra year of experience. So maybe somewhere in the 80, 90, but I still think that a 55 is kind of low. And your reconciliation, you're saying basically they're going to figure out how much you produced and then balance that out. Is that what you're saying, Tatiana? Yes. Okay. So yeah. So again, it all depends again a lot on the practice's fees. How productive you are. If you're killing it, the $55 is not a bad thing because you're going to make a lot more than that. But if the practice is, if you're not really that busy, I think the 55 is a little low. You know, I would ask for a little bit more if you could. Does a draw in a sense relate to a base salary? Yeah, it basically does. So a draw again is like again, you know, I had that example where you're getting $5,000 a month. Okay, and then if you produced more, the practice would still pay the $5,000 a month because the next month you might make less, and so they have to balance that out. But then at the end, after a certain time period, they reconcile all that. So yeah, that's basically a base salary. So the base salary, either an hourly rate or a guaranteed, say, you know, weekly or monthly rate, is basically a base salary. But you know, so that reconciliation though is done at the end just to kind of balance everything out. Malpractice insurance tails after they quit. Yeah, I don't do the one with the tails. I've always had the one that's I think it's claims made, and I forget the other. I don't care for the tails. You actually usually have to pay for the tail, so that, you know, if you're moving practice to practice, and then something happens down the line, you know, a couple of years, you got to chase back that insurance company. I think you're better off with not using the tail. You know, use the one that covers you the whole time. Going to go back to one from Sharon. Can I ask about working interview transition period? If I get a period of working from shadow to assistant to fully become associate, how long should it be, and should it be paid? So a working interview, I mentioned that last time in the associate agreement thing. You know, a working interview, I always feel that first of all, you got to have your license. Secondly, you got to have malpractice insurance to cover yourself, or if the practice is going to pay for that, make sure that that's covered. You should be paid for a working interview. All right. You know, you're going to be producing money for the practice, and you should be compensated for that. So I would have an agreement, a small agreement saying, yeah, I'll do a working interview, and, you know, what's the hourly rate, or do I get a percentage or whatever? I think it's safer just to do an hourly rate with a working interview, so that you're going to get paid. I think it's fair to do that. I don't think it's fair to ask somebody to work for free. You know, I just think that you should have that. And, you know, to working as an assistant, you mean like a dental assistant in the practice, or are you talking about assistant doctor in the practice? I'm not really sure, but you know, again, if you're coming out of school and they're going to hire you, I think you should become an employee almost right away. You know, I don't think you should be doing a whole lot of hygiene. I think they should be able to feel comfortable putting you right into a practice. And, you know, obviously they're not going to give you endos and crowns and everything the first day, but, you know, you should be doing some restorative and getting to know patients right away. So I hope that answers that question. Let me go back down again. As new grad, seems difficult to ask for an appraisal or practice, but the potential of practice ownership frequently gets brought up. Do you have any recommendations, safety nets you'd recommend to ensure it can be an option once you may be ready to partner if you end up seeing yourself there long term? So let me just read this over again as a new grad. Yeah, I mean, I think it's an honest conversation you have to have. If they say, you know, you could become a partner in this practice, I think you have to say, well, you know, what does that entail? Like, you know, do you have a valuation of the practice at this time? You know, and what would be the cost for me to become a partner? And they should be ready to answer that. If they're going to offer that, they should be prepared. I don't think they should say this is something we're going to think about later, because they're just going to string you along. It's like that part of that contract that said, you know, we hope to offer benefits in the future, and if we do, we'll give them to you. Well, that's worth nothing, you know. So if they're actually talking about the practice ownership potential or partnership potential, they should be ready with with an appraisal. And you know, again, you don't have to go out and get the appraisal right away. I would just ask them to do it. And, you know, and if you could be somewhat cautious with that. If they're going with a reputable firm to do the practice appraisal, and you get somebody else to look at it, in other words, you know, send it to somebody you could pay them a smaller fee to look over the paperwork and see if what they said makes sense, you know, then that's a less expensive way of doing appraisal of the practice rather than doing it yourself. So what I'm saying is, you know, if you feel comfortable that they're getting a true, honest appraisal of the practice ahead of time, and you can trust that, then that would be, you know, I mean, they're going to say, this is what we think it's worth anyway. Okay. They're going to say, if you're going to become a partner, our practices are worth $1 million and it costs you $250 if we have 4 of us to buy in. They're probably not going to negotiate that. Buying a practice, on the other hand, it's supply and demand again. So, if my practice is worth 600,000 and, I've got one buyer and I want to get out, and that person says, I'm going to give you 500,000, I'm going to go, well, what's my choice, So, I think in a partnership agreement, it's a little more set on, they probably have good accounting practices and everything like that, and that's pretty well set up. So, that may not be that negotiable, but a buyout may be a little bit more negotiable. And again, I hope that answers that question. A second question is restrictive covenants. Is it common, reasonable for the employer to employ restrictions on soliciting or utilizing referral sources? That's a really good question. And I think that came up at some point, and I don't think that really would be ethical. If you move to another practice 5 miles down the road and you're outside the restrictive covenant area and you have a good relationship with the oral surgeon that the practice uses, there should really be no way that they can restrict you from doing that, because again, that's freedom of choice, that's access to care for your patients. I mean, if they say, you can't use the best oral surgeon in our area because I'm telling you can't, I don't think that'll hold up in court. So I don't think they can do a restrictive covenant on a referral source. That's really kind of a non-contractual independent relationship that you would develop with with a specialist. So I really don't think that they could reasonably put that into a contract and that would hold up. So again, I think that would really, again, legal advice on that one, if they do that, but I don't think that would ever hold up. All right. Did I get most of the other questions, Amanda? Do you see anything else that's...
I believe that is all the ones in the chat. I did see there was some up top by Herta, but it looks like Jamie reiterated them.
Yeah.
So I believe that is all, unless anybody has any other questions, put them in the chat now. I'll give you a minute there, and then if not, we will conclude.
Yeah, thanks. Really good questions. I mean, everybody's you guys are very on top of things, and those are really, really thoughtful questions. And I hope I can answer them as best I could. I'll be happy to try to contact you with by email. I generally try to check email regularly, depends on how busy I am during the day. But yeah, my pleasure, everybody. I'm glad. And you know what? I just want to say one thing as past president of the PDA. Organized Dentistry is here to support you. We want our members to succeed, and that's why we do programs like this. So if you haven't yet, if you're a senior and you haven't signed up for membership in PDA, ADA, wherever you're going in the country, it's your support network, and there's a lot of good things that the Organized Dentistry does. I'm on a task force right now that's looking at the shortage of workforce members. We're short of dental assistants, we're short of hygienists, and we're going to be proposing a pretty major effort to our legislatures to try to ameliorate that. And it's going to take a lot of money, but if they're serious about access to care for our citizens, particularly in the rural areas, we need to do something to increase the workforce, and that's going to have to start at the high school level. To educate young students about career possibilities in dental, dentistry and dental assisting, dental hygiene. So I'm not doing this for my benefit. Okay, we're doing this for our members. So we want to be responsive to our membership, and there's wellness issues that the PDA, ADA are involved with. Take advantage of those if you need so. But please join Organized Dentistry, and for those of you that are still on the call, and if you're not a senior, seriously consider a residency program. Again, I think that is so helpful for for your development and experience and such like that. So if you can find the time to do so, I'd recommend doing that. Well, thanks everybody for your attention. I really appreciate you being on the call tonight, and best wishes to you, especially toward the end of the year. I know May's coming up real soon, so a lot of you are looking for getting out of here real quick. So good to you. Thanks again.
Yes, thank you, everybody, and be on the lookout for the post-event email. I'll be sharing some more information as well in there. So everyone have a great night and a wonderful rest of your week. And thank you again, Dr. Incalcaterra.
You're welcome. Good night, all.
Good night.